So welcome to video number 4 in this particular series, Social Work with Victims of Abuse. And again, your fan club here is Cy and Carlene. I want to talk today about elders, and I want to talk today a little, so we'll talk about elders, we'll talk about elder abuse, we'll talk about structural abuse. I think I'll begin with micro, meso, macro as a little continuum of context. Often when we think of social work with victims of abuse, people tend to think of rape, they tend to think of wife assault. Those are kind of the more common when we say abuse right now, historically, abuse, that's what it is, or child abuse when you think of social workers. You think of social workers intervening with children who are abused by their parents or caregivers. But I also want to talk to you about social work with victims of abuse, elder abuse. That's part of what we're doing here too. Okay, that's happening all the time. And all the things we talked about previously in terms of the identity pegs of a person, their whole profile. When you're working with an elder, bisexual, heterosexual, what's their class story, what's their racial identity, what's their family configuration, all the story of their life, the whole complexity of where they were born, their journey through their time on this planet has meaning right now in the context of them being an elder. We don't want to look at an elder and just say, oh, in the last 5 minutes, blah, blah, blah. We want to reflect on their whole life story. So just to give a very concrete example, if Carlene was born in a very, very poor family, let's say you had a single mom, poor family, lots of poverty, and you lived very poor. You're eating from cans of corn, just cold cans of corn, right? Homelessness and so on. The developmental years of your body, if you had poor calcium, it means your bones aren't very dense. It means you may have even had learning disabilities if you weren't getting enough iron, folic acid, B12, those kinds of things. So I meet you when you're 65. You might have osteoporosis. You might have really poor teeth. Your teeth might have been removed at 65. You may have had a life where much of the time you felt foggy about the world, and that might be part of a learning disability that was never fully addressed. Okay? So you can't take, let's say, the Queen of England at age 65. Queen of England never suffered from nutritional deficits. We'd be pretty sure of that.
Yeah.
And then an average client that you might meet in a women's shelter, reflecting on what has their body been through, what has their spirit, their soul, their heart, their full identity. We know another thing, for example, is people who've been using their brains all of their life, they've actually grown more neurons and dendrites or pathways. So the person who's been, let's say, a professional person all of their life versus a person who the only job they could ever get was as a cleaning person. If we reflect on the movie Precious, we meet her when she's 14, 15, and she hasn't even learned how to read and write. The Queen of England may have been expected when she was going through school to learn French, learn English, learn Latin, all kinds of things. And then all her life, because she was given different social contexts, she's being expected to learn all the time. She's watching the media release, she's watching a year-end report, she's learning about her little people in other countries and their cultural changes or revolutions, whatever. Whatever we could say about the Queen of England, we can guess she's had good nutrition and constant learning opportunities. So her brain is likely to be stronger, let's say, than Precious as we see her when she's at the end of the documentary. We feel hopeful for her, but we still know she's got a struggle ahead of her. My memory is she's been diagnosed HIV positive, and she's got 2 children, and she's kind of going off on her own. If we met her again when she was 65, or if we met her mother or her grandmother at age 65, there's going to be physically different challenges in the Queen of England. Okay? So having said that, Right now, what's happening in the news, I'm sure you've all been hearing about C-19, and my two colleagues here have their masks on. I have my mask right here, but I'm living dangerously. I'm living, because I want you to see my face for the purposes of the video here. So we know the people who are more vulnerable to being really sick and to dying are elders in elder homes. So going back to my idea of micro, meso, and macro. Micro meaning the one-on-one, the right here, right now, dynamics or zone or sphere micro. I might have a client in front of me who's in a woman's shelter, a homeless shelter, who's 65. So right now, right here, I'm going to be pondering how she moves her hands, how she's breathing, how her skin looks, her complexion. Does her hair look clean and well groomed? Do her fingers have arthritis? Are there any aspects of her that physically, mentally, emotionally, that I need to be pondering in terms of right now the situation? That's the micro piece. The meso is kind of the middle of that, the middle of the three, right? So pondering her relationships with her children, her grandchildren, her spouse, her sister, her friendship network. So that it's the middle, beyond just the one person. Who is she networked with? Who can she ask? She needs $10 to go buy some food. Does she have a friend she can borrow from? How long till her next old age pension check? Does she get a CPP check, a Canada pension amount? What does she know about all the documents and so on, right? So
has her mental health changed over the course of her life?
Over her life, exactly. Was she ever diagnosed with anything? What do these things all mean? If she has diabetes, if she's pre-diabetic, so she's kind of, vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Has she ever had an eating disorder, right? Like there's a whole bunch of things that are micro. Then there's the things that are meso, the family around her and her network. And then there's macro. So macro is the stuff of, if she's indigenous, I need to be reflecting on, 5, 6, 8, 10 generations of abuse and deprivation and trauma. She may have inherited, in a way, all kinds of ghosts and bad feelings and broken hearts from her parents who were in the residential school system. Poor parenting skills because they didn't get to develop emotionally.
Aversion to religion.
Aversion to religion, or an obsessive clinginess to religion, right? So this is our mission. When we're working with an elder person, you often have that mission of reflecting on micro, meso, macro in a let's say a more enriched way than you might have if someone's in front of you and they're 15, right? Because they've lived longer, there's more there. That's it, right? One of the things we've recently come across to reflect upon is with many, many women who you might find in shelters, brain injuries. This research is only the last 5 or 10 years we've started realizing women who've been abused repeatedly. My father beat my mother up so many times I can't count. It was sort of, look, we had a whole weekend where nobody was fighting and there was no arguing and no abuse. That would stand out. But other than that, it was so much abuse and yelling and stuff all the time, chaos. Many times if a man has thrown a woman down a flight of stairs and she's hit her head, she might not even know, that was a concussion. We've been talking about it with sports figures, people who've been playing hockey or football. They may not even realize, you've had 7 concussions, or those concussions made you more impulsive.
Yeah, they impacted your brain, and that changed your personality and how you interact with the world and see the world.
Precisely. We knew for a while that was a thing with sports figures or men who did professional wrestlers. We've known for a while that's the thing. The guy's punch drunk. He's been punched in the head so many times he doesn't even make sense. Right? We now know, transferring that scholarly knowledge and research on the brain, women who've been in abusive relationships may have had concussions. They may have had forced learning disabilities or poor impulse control, they might cry more, they might rage more, they may have a harder time learning because of the head injuries that were never even diagnosed, right? So if you're working with a 65-year-old woman in a women's shelter, this is a question you should be asking yourself. Has she been in multiple abusive relationships? And if so, is there a possibility that somewhere along the way she suffered a head injury? If she's also had drugs and alcohol as part of her story, I worked for a year in a women's shelter here, and it was kind of like the worst shelter, the worst end of the road shelter. At that shelter, it was the shelter that you went to, it's called Minimal Barrier now, is one of the labels sometimes. There are women's shelters like Elizabeth Fry shelters where you can go with your children. Those shelters often have protocols where you cannot be actively using, you cannot be actively in a psychotic state, you can't be hearing voices, and because it upsets the children. So those shelters will sometimes say, we wish you to go to this other shelter. And some shelters you can actively be using. That was the shelter that I was at for a year. The shelter where kind of everything could be happening. Many of those women that I saw there, surprising, before I worked there, I thought shelters were more for young women. I hadn't imagined, that was one of my blind spots, that many of the women in these shelters, they've been poor all their life. They've been on the edge of homelessness all their life. They're now not able to be sex trade workers anymore. They're not able to have a boyfriend take care of them. They don't have skills that they can bring to the workforce to
And
take
everything that they've relied on thus far has kind of left them now. They're not able to sustain it, and they're lost.
Well said. Yeah, they're lost. They've kind of come to a time where the harshness their body has gone through using drugs or through being in abusive relationships, or even just the harshness, falling down flights of stairs or being in a car accident somewhere along the way.
Being
Malnourished, living on cigarettes and donuts and all of this kind of thing. It has consequences for the body. And again, if we compare it to the Queen of England, if she had fallen down a flight of stairs somewhere along the way, A, someone would have noticed. B,
and we would all know.
We would all know. Someone would have intervened, and she probably would have got the best care, the best medical care and healing care immediately before it became worse.
Yep.
Right? So, social work with victims of abuse, social work with elders. Right now, we have a big thing going on in the world of C19. People who are in these tough situations are often the poor. Again, the Queen of England wouldn't be in a place where C19 would be rampant. She would be in private care. They probably have the Queen of England probably has a nanny flat, what are those called? Nanny flats? Where it's attached to the castle. So there's the big castle and then the littler castle where the grandma goes. And that castle only has 3 butlers and 5 cleaning ladies and 2 cooks.
And like the servant's kitchen.
Yeah, the servant's kitchen or something like that. So the clients we're going to work with as social workers, right? So the social workers are usually working with the poor. These are these places we're seeing, these franchised, profit-oriented elder care places have been understaffed, undercleaned, poor nutrition, all the things that are going to, if anything, amplify the troubles of that long story of a 65-year-old woman's life with struggle, right? So I wanted to say that. So the macro level is we have in our world one profit-oriented, like a franchise, like a McDonald's, like a McElders, and you have, these are companies that are looking to make a profit off of old, sick people. That's what they do. So they're looking, how can we give the crappiest food, how can we give the smallest space, so you have 4 people sharing a room sometimes, you have the fewest number of cleaners, You have the fewest number of personal care aides. Personal care aides being the people who help them shower or change their clothes or feed them or make sure they've taken their medicine. The fewest number of social workers who would be organizing social events or taking them out for a walk or those kind of things. So, macro level, corporations, federal and provincial government haven't set enough standards in place. The federal government could, in a different world, say, tomorrow, they could wake up and say, okay, here's the new rule. From now on, it's a crime in our country to abandon and neglect an old person. It is a crime to give them any less than 3 baths a week. It is a crime. You could have a list of things that the federal government could say, these are the standards in our nation. The provincial government, we know, the provincial governments are responsible for health care. But I believe we could rally the provincial governments to get on side with this if the federal government threw in some money. So I say this because on a macro level, it could change overnight. What we're hearing is the politicians are saying, oh, it's going to take 30 years, or oh, we can't do anything about this, or oh, the federal government says this is a provincial responsibility, and the province says, oh, it's a federal responsibility. And they all can say, we had no idea it was so bad, which we actually have seen in the news, right? Mm-hmm. Any of us knew this. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you a story. A year and a half ago, I go and do practicum visits for my third-year social work students. I got in a cab. I was going to an elder care place here in town. I said, I want to go to this place. And I hadn't been to this specific place before. So I said the name of the place. The cab driver said, oh, that's the place where people go to die. I said, no, it's an elder care place. And I said the name again because I thought he was mistaken. And he said, no, he said, that's where people go to die. How obscene. How obscene that the place is not imagined as a place where people go to be loved, to be cared for, to be nurtured, to be given
a good quality of life, again, with people that can offer it to them.
Right. Dignity. Whatever the Queen of England is living in her granny flat, her granny castle, obviously not everybody's going to get that, but to be getting instead the place you go to die, that's obscene. If the cab driver knows it as that, right? I found that very startling. It kind of haunted me for a couple weeks. And often that's what these places are. It's a Macbeth place in a way. The franchise we'll take in the people, we'll see how much profit we can make, we'll cut back everything we can legally get away with, and then bam. So this is the macro level. On that macro level, what does that mean? I heard a statistic this morning. I'm not certain that it's accurate because it was just something on the news. Apparently 80% of the people in Ontario who have died from C-19 are people who lived in these elder care places or visited those places or worked in those places. What does that tell you? It tells you the taxi driver kind of understood the point. Huh? Taxi driver got it. Other places you go to die. So, this is elder abuse on a macro level. You could sometimes, if you knew the story more, on a meso level, if the children, if a woman has spent her life raising 4 children, she's played by the standard patriarchal rules of the game, she's been a good wife, a good mother, she was married to a truck driver kind of guy, she did everything she possibly could within the rules of that way of being in the world. And here she is now, let's say, 68, no money, her kids have grown and moved off, they don't care about her, they're not being compassionate or responsible. So at a meso level, a middle level, you could say those people should be stepping up and doing a bit more for mom or grandma. They could be visiting her more often. They could be, as social workers with victims of abuse, elder abuse, you could say it's elder neglect in a way. You haven't visited your mom in 11 years? Unless she was abusive, or, I'm giving kind of a standard kind of iconic, overgeneralized little story for us to use as something to hang that idea. There's macro level abuses and neglects and abandonment, federal, provincial government.
So power structures.
Power structure. And then sometimes on a family level, people aren't doing as much as they could, and sometimes they're actively abusing. They stole her money. You know, they sold mom's house and they split the money with the kids, and mom's now living in some dump where nobody cares about her. That's a type of abuse or neglect. Then within the place, the client may be saying to you, I can't stand living with 3 people who have Alzheimer's in my room because they're constantly talking and yelling and repeating themselves. I don't have Alzheimer's. I have a clear and lucid mind. Can you get me in a better room? Right? So you see, micro, meso, macro, all the layers and levels of abuse, they have consequences, and we as social workers wishing to do better, be better, create better, this is a little bit of a story, let's say, of elder abuse. Right now, it's in the news everywhere, all the different levels, and we see children or grandchildren who do love their elders, who do care. We can see them outside the nursing homes, and they're talking to grandma through the glass and so on to protect grandma. So we might wish to intervene. How could we do that differently? Maybe we need to force on a macro level. These organizations need to have a visiting room or 10 visiting rooms where there is
We're following those distances, and we can do it safely to interact with the people that would make our lives better.
Right, make their lives better. There's a quick way to do that. The dollar store downtown now has all these clear barriers between, and they have masks. What if we as social workers, we could be getting free masks to give to everybody, different kinds of masks, like high intensity masks or let's say more casual masks, gloves, barriers. Maybe that's what we could be doing right now, so that at a micro level, grandma could see her kids who maybe do love her and want to visit her, but they feel scared.
Yeah.
Right? So asking ourselves, at what level will we intervene? Micro, meso, macro. Sometimes we do all 3. Sometimes, like right now, here's Martha in front of me, who is in a nursing home, and she hasn't had a visitor for 5 weeks, and she's crying all the time because she feels so lonely. So masks, barrier, maybe help her set up the phone thing. She doesn't know how to do Skype. Maybe we, what right now, right here, quick fixes could we do to be helpful?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe she's even being abused by those other people in her room. At one point, my husband was in the hospital, sometimes for weeks at a time. He's been sick for 5.5 years. He was put in an elders area of the hospital where a lot of the people did have Alzheimer's. And some of the people cry and yell, and they do it 24 hours a day, and it's very emotionally distressing for people who don't have Alzheimer's. Yeah. So sometimes there's this idea of, oh, elders, they're all the same. Just throw them in a great big hockey arena, throw in some white mashed potatoes, and then they'll die and it's fine, right? Just like you're a unique person. No other person since the beginning of time or in the future of time is exactly Carlene. You're it.
Mm-hmm.
When you're 65, you're still the unique Carlene. You're just a little bit more complicated because you've had more life experiences. When you're 79, you're still Carlene.
Mm-hmm.
We have a belief in our culture that elders are kind of more, we don't like to admit it. We like to think, oh, all the grandmas out there, they're baking pies, and the grandkids are hugging them, and they've got a big house and hearth, and then they knit. This is the stereotype or the mythology.
But they live happily ever after, and their importance in the world is just mitigated because they're not relevant anymore.
They're not relevant to capitalism and patriarchy anymore.
And what we value.
And this is especially relevant for women and racialized women, poor women, women who in any way have been stigmatized. So their whole life story of oppression and consequence, the osteoarthritis, the osteoporosis, the missing teeth, so on, all the illnesses and trauma of the body, the head injury of the whole life story, and now they're in an elder place. The elder place is often just one more dimension of oppression, isolation, and so on. Again, as a mainstream culture, the mainstream culture doesn't like to admit that, but we do treat our elders in a really bad way in, let's say, mainstream white culture.
Yeah.
We don't want to admit that, but we do. We do. That's a fact. And I don't have the numbers, but and the numbers are always changing. But literally now, thousands of elder people in America and Canada have died from C-19, partially because these places are dumpy, they're not cleaned up, they don't have enough protection equipment, they weren't intervened with quickly enough, like where they knew, okay, one person has this
Exactly, and
issue.
they didn't get it dealt with in time. So sanitation, living in close quarters.
Not enough personal care aids, not listening to the people. So this is another, people may have said, I don't feel well, and it's like, yeah, you're an old person. Old people don't feel well, right? Versus if right now, today, you went to the doctor and said, I don't feel well,
Yeah.
they might have more respect and listen to you with more nuance. We expect old people to not
Have
feel well.
difficulty breathing.
Yeah, and it's just an old person anyway, right? There's a lot of stigma and a lot of repression of ageism. That's ageism. And all those other isms, if that was an indigenous woman, if that was a woman of color, a woman who can't speak English very well, an immigrant person, all of that is layered and sedimented on her in this context. So social work with victims of abuse and elders, there's sort of a big background that you can reflect upon. But then there's the specifics of it, of, let's say, in a family, grandma is in a more day-to-day kind of story in a family where they're not treating her with respect, they're not treating her with dignity. Let's say grandma lives there with two of her kids and the spouse of one of the kids, let's say. We'll just make up a story right there, right? Abuse can happen in that kind of family too. We tend to think, oh, everybody loves their grandma. I happen to have adored my grandparents, and they adored me, and they raised me, and they were much of the reason why I'm actually still alive and still here. It wasn't my parents. It wasn't my parents. But my grandparents, taught me work ethic. They taught me all these things. So I have very big respect for elders because I had that privilege. But there are people out there who will be disrespectful, abusive, or exploitive. And this is, let's say, statistically a more kind of common thing. Elders, their check comes in and the kid takes the money and goes and spends it. Or lives in her house, and she may feel it's kind of like occupied territory. It's her house, but the kid says, no, we're going to listen to this music, or no, we're cooking this, or, like, let's say...
Makes those executive decisions without consulting.
Exactly, disrespecting her. And we, even in terms of indigenous communities, again, there's the stereotype of all indigenous people always love and respect all of their elders. Not necessarily, right? An elder person in any ethno-cultural community, any religious community, any geographic community, you can't say, oh, it's an Italian Catholic family, they would never abuse the grandma. They might, right? And it's our job as social workers who work with victims of abuse to be on alert for that. There could be, and when I say abuse, I want to kind of clarify a little bit here. It could be abuse of neglect. It could be abuse of abandonment. It could be active economic abuse. It could be physical abuse. Or it could just be not being informed, right? So again, if I take that story of with my husband, as he got more illnesses, I knew I needed to install something so that when he was going up the stairs, he could hang on to this. I knew and had the resources and the privilege to put things on the bathtub so that he could get in and out, a special bathtub chair, a hose, right? So neglect is a type of abuse too. You could have a family where the family is very poor and they don't have, the chair I bought for the bathtub cost $200. That's a lot of money for a chair in the bathtub. For many families, that would be impossible, right? So neglect is another type of abuse. Like, this is what I want to talk about too, right? Not always active abuse.
Not actively perpetrated all the time. Sometimes it's just structural or
Passive. They don't know better. They don't know better. And so that can be our role as social workers with victims of abuse. Grandma is being abused, you could say, by that situation. She needs help getting up and down the stairs. She needs the house to be made differently organized for her. Move all the mats and anything she might trip on. You may need railings around the room so she has something to hang on to. A handle in the bathtub. She may need different kinds of food. She may need somebody who organizes her medicines. So that might be where we come in as social workers to enhance her life, maybe through being an educator, being an assertive voice on her behalf, maybe saying to the family, maybe we need to move. Maybe we need to get a different kind of home here, or maybe grandma needs to move out of this home and go somewhere else so that she can get the support and encouragement she needs. So I just wanted to, for today and for this particular video, social work with victims of abuse, macro, meso, micro. How do we intervene with respect and empathy and tenderness? Take into consideration the whole life story of that person. Treat them with dignity so they can make all their own choices and affirmations too. We can't, just like with you at 22 or if you were 72, I want to ask, what do you want? What does this mean to you? Sometimes, again, with ageism, we think, oh, well, we'll do this for her. No, we need to ask her, what do you want? What is meaningful to you? What would you prefer? Just like we would with you. Okay. I'll tell you a story on that. I know of someone who's in an elder home, and he likes to drink. All his life, he's liked to drink. He drinks. He also likes to have the services of prostitutes. Social work code of ethics. Social work code of ethics. If you want to go have sex with someone and you buy them some presents, do I have the right to tell you no? It's your sex and they want some presents and...
my feelings about it don't matter.
Well, you do the bumpy, whatever you want to do, right? That's up to you. I don't get to say, no, I don't want you to have... Let's say you have a sweetheart, he has no income, or she has no income, and you want to have sex on Friday, and the sort of deal you have is you take that person out for dinner and dancing, and you buy them some stuff, and then you go do bumpy, and you're happy, and you wake up Saturday morning and they go home. It's none of my business, right? But if someone is 72 and he lives in a nursing home or an elder care home, and he wants to do the same thing, do I have the right to say no? I don't. That's his penis and that's her or their or whatever. He wants to go drinking. I can say to him, you're a diabetic and that might not be in your best interest. Or, you know, if you go spend your whole paycheck on your special friend, you're going to have no money by Friday.
You can only inform them. You can't make the decisions for them.
Right, exactly. So, do I want to be the abuser? I would be the abuser in a way. Social work with victims of abuse. If I tried to take away his or her right to dignity and free choice. So this is, you know, it gets very complicated sometimes for us to reflect on these things. So, social work with elders right now, very big story in the news about C-19. Is horrific, it's heartbreaking, it's terrible. A really big, like, let's intervene right now is at the macro level, and keeping our fingers crossed, but also keeping our alert to be vigilant throughout our career, because I doubt that this is going to get solved. I think what might happen is some improvements will be made, but unless they make new legal standards for all of these places, for example, like for every 4 residents you have to have this much space, you have to have this many personal care assistants, you have to have this many resources, and it gets inspected, not just once every year for 4 minutes by phone. Apparently that's how some of the inspections have been done. Can you imagine? That's criminal neglect in my opinion. right? Oh, you own the Muck Elders place, and I phone you and say, so how are your standards?
Super good.
Super good, eh? Well, let's call you in a year.
Okay.
It's awful. It's actually criminal neglect. It's just hideous and gruesome. I can't even, it just breaks my heart. But for the purposes of this video, thank you again for signing up for the courses, Social Work with Victims of Abuse and Elder Abuse. And in the next video, we'll continue to mix and match some of these concerns and beliefs and learnings and insights and strategies.
And learn how they intersect.
Yeah, intersectionality. Thank you.